How would the help being offered by Europe assist in migration?
You see, first, I mean, we seem to have exhausted all the possible credible avenues for addressing this issue head on. Okay. You know, and even when one were to talk of concrete pathways to coming out of this imbroglio, it still boils down to one thing. Some of the European countries that are not willing to really donate anything, should I begrudge them? Perhaps no, because you see, the monies they donate, where do they end up? If African governments are complaining that, I mean, they still send to Europe, European multinational companies come here, avoid tax, pack the money, send it to Europe. Natural resources, we don't have capacity to manufacture. We pack it, send it back to Europe. The problem, all of these are still symptoms. The main problem is that I think when we go back 50 years, 30 years, 50 years, 60 years, what we should be looking at are some of the socio-political imbalances and injustices that were created to suit colonial interests that will forever, as it were, continue to militate against the progress and well-being of African states. It looks as if the discussion has begun and it's ended. There are certain things that you seem not to be able to change. I mean, we are there are certain African countries that you can't speak to the leaders except you go first of all, even today, to obtain permission from their so-called previous colonialists, until colonialism and neocolonialism and all these vestiges are killed. We won't go anywhere.
All right,
number two.
In this case now, is it going to be very impossible to handle this migration?
Well, I think it will be possible only if both the European governments, those concerned, I mean, like look at the German chancellor. She went there, briefly spoke, and then she left. What is Germany's particular headache? Because you know the countries that are, you look at Britain, you look at France, you look at maybe Portugal and co. These are the countries that have major stake in speaking to African government that they can sit up and listen. That's one. Then number two, if they can sit up and talk, if these countries that that I mentioned can, Francophone and Anglophone, can sit down together with their former leaders and talk frank, open discussions and discuss, I mean, admit mistakes that have been made in the past and discuss ways of moving forward. Like I say, we live in a political economy. If what is making people to run out of Africa is economic downturn and economic hardship, it is because the main source of the of the economic issue, which is the political, I mean, like I said, is the political economy. Until the political leadership is summons the will to address economic issues, no matter how many fine blueprints you bring about to take of economic issues, it will not work because bureaucrats and technocrats are subject to the politocracy. Which is why, if our leaders are serious, they should sit back with the masses and let us work out means and solutions of, look, we've made mistakes in the past. Let's sort out our issues. And in countries where, where certain tribes and certain people's groups have been marginalized, they can begin to look at how to sort out these issues. Once we have inclusion in Africa, once we have internal inclusion, even those who have traveled, we really want to come back.
Okay. All right, we'll come back to this. We now have Dr. Alabi with us. Now let's come back to you now. We've been having distorted links with you earlier on, but I think we have you better now. Now, reports show that 2 of the terrorists that bombed France a few days ago were processed as migrants months ago. How much of danger do the migrants pose to Europe?
I think for me, it's probably the other way around. How much of a danger has Europe posed to Africa for centuries? But more importantly, coming closer to the current time, I think we have to understand that the measures that are being taken currently, I don't see any long-term sustainable solutions in them. For me, I understand it more temporary, probably a knee-jerk type reaction to what is happening, that Europe suddenly finds itself overwhelmed by the sudden massive arrivals of migrants from all parts of Africa who are willing to risk everything to get to these shores. That is the danger. So, but I also think that the fact of the recent events in Paris over the weekend, that we now are being told that some of those attackers had come into Europe through the refugee and migrant routes. That, I think, becomes a more critical challenge to Europe itself to address. what I think more specifically in terms of any danger at all, if it is immediate to Europe, will be in terms of what it will mean in terms of the demand on the resources of Europe from these new arrivals on the shores of Europe in general, and whether they have the resource base to cope with the even basic quintessential living standards that will be required of these new arrivals before they settle in the system. That is probably the major danger, if at all, that's been posed by the new arrivals.
Guests in the studio said that until some fundamental issues are tackled, the issues of migration is just like a lip service. Even the money is the $2 billion that is being provided or pledged by EU to Africa is just lip service. Issues like colonialism, tax evasion, and all of that as a case. But what do you think about that? What's your take?
Well, I've always said, I mean, it's 1.8 billion EU, and it's only a pledge so far. The only country that's actually made a real commitment out of that is the UK. David Cameron, our Prime Minister here, committing some 400 million EU to that fund. No other country has come forward with any substantive figure. But I think the challenges are the fact that, one, I said it's a knee-jerk reaction, more or less. It's not going to provide any long-term sustainable solution to it. And I suspect that most of that money, when it does come into the stream, will be more likely to support maybe strengthening the border controls and security controls from the African side to probably try and prevent the continuous flow of migrants into the land. Now, on the issues of the ongoing theft and fraud that's been perpetrated on the continent for a long time, I always say that it takes two. When you have African leaders and politicians stealing their country's money and bringing them to Europe, and Europe open-handedly receive this. As far as I'm concerned, there are two guilty parties. Yeah. And more importantly, when we have our African leaders come to Europe, you roll out the red carpet to receive them, to welcome them. Now, if you were to shun them, actually say, no, you're not welcome here, and their practices become the source of the real problems. The fact that they're not using their national resources to develop their countries, to develop their people, they're starving the people, and they're bringing those funds into Europe. In effect, the problem itself has been perpetrated by Europe. And so what they're actually doing now, for me, doesn't really address the issue. You want to stop the flow of illicit funds out of Africa into Europe. Once you start doing that, you're forcing the African governments to invest the funds they have, to invest the funds they get from their national resources to develop the countries and the people. Then you will not think that there will be many more Africans who still believe that the grass is greener on this side.
Dr. Sheriff Alabi, thank you for talking to us on Africa Today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, Mike. God bless.
All right. Now, from this standpoint where we are, people are still moving. In fact, people are still planning to move. So there's a lot of...
even as we speak.
Even as we speak, people are still moving and people are still planning to move, as the case may be. What's the way out of all of this?
Look at Egypt, for instance. The Egyptian foreign minister told them that, look, his country alone had about 5 million migrants as at when he went there. You know, it comes down to the fact that the foreign policy of Europe or of the EU should not be one that addresses issues, should be one that addresses peoples. And I think that, you know, like look at China now. They give interest-free loans. Many countries are running to China. Nothing is impossible. If their foreign policy, if the EU's foreign policy is redesigned and recalibrated to cater to the issues of global national fellow feeling, the fact that, you know, I have, you don't have, and there's something I can do about it. They are talking of increasing scholarships. Scholarships are good, but I don't know how many Africans are going to get scholarship, go over there and want to come back. And by doing that, you might have unwittingly weakened our own education system as well. So it's neither here nor there. But for me, I think what Europe needs to do on this basis, since we're talking about the migrant issue involving Europe and Africa, Europe needs to recalibrate her foreign policy to ensure that they cater more to, I mean, the simple, normal, basic needs of Africa as a neighbor. Because the well-being of Africa
but the
is the well-being of Europe.
The foreign interest of any single country itself, you see, it's about self.
Which is
How will Europe?
Which is why, self, isn't it? China has money. They say come and take interest free. That is not heard of in any of the economic textbooks, but they blaze a trail. And I mean, you look at what you're confronted with, people running en masse to Europe, and they've created a door and window to the people coming from Syria. Why can't they create for the very little thousands coming from Africa? Okay. What they need to do, like I said, is to redesign the foreign policy option to ensure that they just want to do good for the sake of keeping the neighbor well. If they do that, it will solve the issue. If they don't and continue to address self-interest, it will not work for them.
Cyril Abaku, thank you for coming on Africa Today.
It's been a pleasure, man.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We also thank Dr. Sheriff Alabi for talking to us from the UK, and we also apologize we couldn't have Itai Viriri from Italy earlier on. Now, with the growing number of migrants arriving in Europe at an unprecedented level, an increase in the trend is expected to continue in the coming years. Tackling this phenomenon that has gone beyond natural would take more than high wire fences patrolled by dogs, as it requires creating more opportunities and building less walls. That's a package for today, but don't forget to join the conversation on Twitter at TVC News_Africa. You can also follow me for updates around the continent at M.Okwoche TVC. Until the next one, I am Mike Okwoche. Don't forget, this is Africa. Bye for now.